In the end, they're angry about Illinois being the laughing stock in politics. The best quote I heard from that was Jon Stewart. He said, your U.S. attorney talks tough about indicting all these people, politicians. He said, hunting for corruption in Illinois is like hunting for cows.
Wah, I'm so sick of it. I'm one of those angry people. I mean, by the same token, we provided the country with our president.
Yeah, well, we're still, I think, only four in indictments per capita, so some of our
Only
elected
four.
officials are going to have to work harder. Beyond corruption, I do think the issue that I started with, the issue I teach, one of the issues I teach at Loyola is environmental policy.
Yes.
And the reason I think it transcends so many of the other issues is our dependence on foreign oil is due in large part to the fact that we don't act in a sustainable fashion. We don't try to encourage renewable energy. In addition, if you deal with environmental and sustainability issues, you do issue health care, you deal with national security, you deal with economic development. If you rebuild your transit system and have bullet trains instead of cars, if the stimulus package has transit instead of highways,
Hmm.
you're going to have, if you have transit instead of highways, you're going to have a cleaner area. You're going to deal with global warming. You're going to deal with our dependence on foreign oil and national security issues as it relates to the instability caused by global warming.
Hmm.
So, environmental issues in the end will address all the other issues you care about.
I must agree. I have to agree with that. And I liked that you were raising that question about transit funds rather than highway funds early
Well,
on.
in the end, highway funds, let's build new highways. Well, what that does is encourage urban sprawl.
Exactly what we don't need more of.
Right. And again, more pollution and poor planning and trying to get people from spot A to spot B. And if we had rebuilt our transit system in a sustainable fashion, as we
Hmm.
should have in the first place, we'd be addressing all those issues, including things like tourism, conventions. If it wasn't a series of slow zones from O'Hare to downtown on the Blue Line,
Right.
you might encourage economic development even more.
Something in the article that was in the Phoenix about you this week or last week mentioned you had some questions about the Olympic bid. A couple weeks ago on this show, we interviewed some folks who are against the Olympic Games coming to Chicago for a variety of reasons, mostly that it's not sustainable. If you were in the Congress, how would you approach the Olympic bid from your hometown?
Well, I look at the Olympic bid with a lot of skepticism about money.
Hmm.
We have been promised that local money won't be used to fund the Olympics, taxpayer dollars won't be used. I think you're already starting to see the tip of the iceberg that tax increment finance money
Right.
is being groomed to be used for the Olympic bid. I think you can look at the cities in the past, and I'm not sure many of them can tell you what a boom it was for their cities from any point of view other than the PR they got in those 2 short weeks.
I'll tell you, the book that we interviewed the author is Chris Shaw was his name, and it's called The Five Ring Circus, and it's just out, and he tells you about who did and did not make money off the Olympics. Um, your greenness has also is only overdone by or only surpassed by your willingness to shake up the wheels under those in power. Not only Todd Stroger, but also Mayor Daley. And so you have really not good friends in high places. Congratulations, Mike.
But first of all, in the end, dissent has its value. In Chicago, we're not used to it, but in the end, there's supposed to be a separation of powers. There's supposed to be a difference between these three branches of government. I think if you were to ask yourself, what's the major reason we have as much corruption as we do in Chicago and Cook County and Illinois, it is the fact that it's really autocratic. There's very little checks and balances and dissent. I think that dissent alone ferrets out a lot of the problems that might exist.
Hmm.
But even though we led the dissent, often against many of the problems that took place, we still got a lot of things done. We just weren't there talking about what was wrong. We offered alternatives. and we got things done. We passed a lot of legislation, and it addresses something that President Obama talked about. I was a delegate for the president in Denver, and doggone, 30 feet straight center from where he was speaking, he said, this government must reinvent itself. It must restructure, streamline, and consolidate. I think he was talking about expectations. I think he was addressing the fact that we're not going to have all the money we need to do everything that everybody out there wants. Again, from healthcare to the environment to education.
Hmm.
He was saying, I think his line was, an 18th century bureaucracy cannot handle the 21st
21st.
century problems.
Right.
And he's right. Well, for 10 years now, I wrote 8 reports detailing how we should reinvent government.
Right.
And it said the same thing. We cannot tax and spend our way out of all these problems, and we are not right-wing Republicans who don't care about the mission of government.
Hmm.
If we were to streamline it, consolidate it, make it more efficient, address public-private partnerships more appropriately, we can carry out those critical missions. So I do think that the dissent I created was not just to raise an alternative voice. It was to offer an alternative plan. And it's nice to have, while I may have a few folks in high places who I've ruffled their feathers, I think the president has echoed much of what I have said in his first few months in office.
Hmm. He's only been in office a month.
Uh,
I know it seems a few months.
yeah.
It's amazing. When one of the things that a pet issue of mine is the question of reapportionment. Can you speak to the fact that if you win this office, you're going to be there for the next census, upon which the reapportionment gets based, and reapportionment for all of you out there is really decides who's sitting in all those seats, the 435 congressional seats, and to a certain extent as well, some local offices. When will we ever get straight and contiguous lines drawn? Will we ever?
Yeah, I mean, you must be a Cub fan
Not.
because you'd have to be as optimistic as a Cub fan would be that you're going to get contiguous lines.
Hey, we just elected a president. I
Oh,
feel we can do anything.
Yeah, but we didn't win a world championship. Anybody can have a bad century. But first, reapportionment starts with the census.
Yes.
And the census must be done appropriately, must be funded appropriately, and must be done with the right spirit and mindset so that you have good data to work with. A lot of people are left out of the census,
Right.
and that's because of a lack of thought process, effort, and resources. But once you have good census data, you must take in mind where we're going. Now, appreciate this. When you're talking about 435 members of Congress and
Right.
reapportionment, there is the first issue for Illinoisans to address, and that is whether or not we retain or lose a congressional seat.
Uh-huh.
Now, if we keep that seat that we have, it's a lot easier. If we lose it, it's going to be a question of who draws the map, who approves it, how much public input is involved, and that's going to be important. It addresses another issue as well. We have heard that the former congressman from the 5th CD might want to come back.
Oh,
But I think there's less credence to that. But if there was a different map, it might be a different story. Appreciate that if Illinois loses a seat, the existing seats move. They expand out and they cover larger areas. And that will have an impact on people listening to us this morning. What happens to the 9th CD? What happens to the 5th CD? How are they moved? How are they expanded? How does that affect their representation? All I can tell folks for now is that they need to be involved with that process. They need to encourage their lawmakers at any level, state rep, state senate, alderman, Congress, county commissioners, to insist that the census process be done fairly and appropriately to include all Americans.